All right, today we're going to talk about World War II, the second of the Great Wars. During World War II, the alliances that were together at the time were the Allied powers, very similar to that which was in World War I. It was Britain, France, Poland, Turkey, and a few other smaller nations that aren't really important. The Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. And there's two really important countries that stay neutral at this time. The USA, and they initially support the Allies in what's called the U.S. Lend-Lease program, and it's part of this military-industrial complex where they are making a lot of money by selling weapons and supplies to the Allies. And then the USSR is going to sign a peace treaty with Germany that they're just not going to fight at all. So they're not against Germany, but they're not with Germany. So, but eventually both of these two are going to join the Allies eventually in the war. And so you have the Axis and Allies looking like this. The Axis powers are in blue, the Allies are in green, and the ones that are in gray are neutral. But you see that it's kind of stacked up against the Axis powers. And you can also see that the colonies are very much part of this war. Now, the war really started with the Axis aggression, especially that of Germany. Now, during the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was basically forced to sign this agreement that said they're not going to be aggressive, they're not going to attack anybody, but they break the Treaty of Versailles and they attack the Rhineland, Sudetenland, and Czechoslovakia and take that over. Italy invades a country called Albany, and Japan invades China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. So they're all expanding and creating pretty big empires. Now, the Allies could have, at this time, gone in and stopped the Axis powers early because the Axis powers hadn't really gotten that far. They haven't built up their military that much. They didn't have very many soldiers. Their factories weren't producing military weapons very quickly. And they could have gone in and stopped them, but they chose the action of appeasement, which is basically letting an aggressive country do what they want to avoid a war. The Allies had just went through World War I. They didn't want to experience another war. And so they hold a meeting called the Munich Conference, and they basically met together with Germany and Italy, and they basically said, well, you can keep that territory that you've taken, but you can't conquer any more territory. And so they let Germany, Italy, and Japan build up their military even more. And so the fighting actually begins. The Germans are not happy with that small amount of territory that they got. And so they start what's called blitzkrieg. These were very fast attacks on a country before they actually had time to mount any defense. And so Germany invades Poland very quickly. They invade and conquer France. And here you can see Hitler standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. They attacked Great Britain. Here you see the Battle of Britain. They attacked them and bombed Britain, caused a lot of destruction, but they were never successful in actually conquering Britain. And fighting also occurred in the colonies a lot too. Now, fighting, they started using even more advanced technology, sniper rifles, improved tanks, improved submarines, bomber planes, which they hadn't had before, with fire bombs, which just could basically destroy a building or a city block. Radios, sonar, and radar. So radios were used for communication. Sonar and radar were used to try to detect your enemies from planes or boats or submarines. And then they also developed something called the atomic bomb in a secret project called the Manhattan Project, where they were developing this very powerful bomb. And we'll get back to that at the end of World War II. So, at first, the U.S. and the USSR were not part of the Allies. But Germany, once they had conquered a lot of continental Europe, they decide that they want to expand even further. So Germany invades the USSR, breaking their peace agreement. So the USSR goes and joins the Allies. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. Now, the U.S. for a long time had been supplying the Allies with goods, and when Japan joined the Axis powers, the U.S. basically stopped trading with Japan, which was really hurting their economy. And so Japan comes in, bombs Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. joins the war. Now, before the U.S. and the USSR joined, the Axis powers in Europe, which is here in yellow, had conquered most of continental Europe. Here they expanded to France, expanded across Eastern Europe, conquered a lot of North Africa. But the tides are going to kind of change on them once the U.S. and the USSR join. North Africa and Italy are taken by the Allies. Russia is going to defeat Germany in the very decisive Battle of Stalingrad, which stops the German attack into the USSR and starts pushing them back to Germany. D-Day is when the Allied forces storm the beaches of France and sort of liberate France from German control. And then finally, VE Day, which stands for Victory in Europe, is when Italy and Germany are completely defeated. Once Italy and Germany are completely defeated, the threat is gone from Europe. They decide to go over and take over Japan, to defeat Japan, which is part of the Axis powers. And they do this by island hopping. They are going from island to island across the Pacific to try to slowly take Japan's territory away from them. And this was extremely difficult work because these islands were very well defended by the Japanese. So a lot of lives were lost trying to take pretty small amounts of territory. Eventually, the U.S. tired of this island hopping, and they decided to use the atomic bomb. And they dropped the only 2 atomic bombs that we had on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we threatened to drop another one, and under the threat of dropping a bomb that we didn't have, Japan surrendered. And you have VJ Day, which is Victory in Japan, and that sort of ends World War II. Now, there are several effects, more effects than what's here, but these are the big ones. One, feminism is really going to gain some power with women contributing to the war efforts. They're going to start to gain more equality, and that movement's really going to get started. You also have Japan is forced to demilitarize, but basically all the production that went into producing Japanese military supplies is then going to go into making commercial manufactured goods. And Japan's going to quickly become a very strong economy. The United Nations is going to be replaced, or is going to replace the League of Nations. They're going to be given some power so they can actually do a little bit in trying to keep peace in the future. And then the biggest one is probably Europe in ruins. Europe was destroyed. All of these major powers, which had control over pretty much the entire globe at the time, were left completely destroyed. And so the U.S. and the USSR are going to become the 2 world superpowers, which in turn is going to lead to the Cold War, which we'll talk about in a little while. It also leads to decolonization. All these colonies around the world are not going to be able, or the Europeans aren't going to be able to control them anymore, so they're going to break free and win their independence. And we'll get into that stuff a little bit later, but that is the World War II. That is World War II.